I want to welcome our audience today. My name is Clara Lineweber. I am the Executive Director of the Tsai Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. And this is the third in our Pathways series. This is an intrapreneur spotlight with Joe Tsai and Gabby Cazzo of Harlem Capital Partners. The goal of our Pathways spotlights are to highlight the journeys along the various innovation pathways of recent Yale alumni and to showcase the myriad ways that they are thinking innovatively to solve problems in the world. Tsai City's mission is to inspire students from diverse backgrounds and disciplines to seek innovative ways to solve real-world problems. So this series is showing how that happens. I'm going to pause for Yale's land acknowledgement, and then I will introduce our guests more fully. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Joseph Tsai. He's a Senior Innovation Fellow at Tsai City this semester, a Yale alum twice over, and co-founder and Executive Vice Chairman at Alibaba. He's also Governor of the Brooklyn Nets and New York Liberty, and it's been a real pleasure having him involved as we begin this new series this year. And I'm also delighted to introduce Gabby Cazzo. She's an alum of the Yale School of Management and principal at Harlem Capital Partners. Harlem Capital Partners is a New York-based minority-owned early-stage venture firm on a mission to change the face of entrepreneurship by investing in 1,000 first founders over the next 20 years. You should feel free to drop questions in the Q&A box as the conversation proceeds, and I'm now going to turn it over to Joe and Gabby.
Claire, thank you very much. And Gabby, it's great to meet you. I feel thrilled to be able to interview you on this panel. And you know, you have a very interesting background, so I want to ask you about that. But first, to kick off, just tell us a little bit about Harlem Capital, because the mission is quite interesting. You're talking about changing the face of entrepreneurship, right? I mean, literally the face, the look, and what is that about? And you know, what problem do you see that you guys are trying to solve?
Fantastic. And Joe, I'm really excited to chat with you today. So thanks for having me again. But like you mentioned, I'm Gabby Cazzo. I'm a principal at Harlem Capital. And you're right, we're a firm that's on a mission to change the face of entrepreneurship. And our big grand goal is to invest in 1,000 diverse founders over the next 20 years. And I think the roadmap for that mission really goes back to our why and our origin story. And so back in 2015, our team was doing research and found that women and minority-owned startups only receive under 3% of venture funding out of the billions of dollars that are going to early stage companies every year. And this is a group that represents 70% of the US population. And so that's a really big gap and huge inefficiency in the market, but also just a really big equity and inequity problem. If you fast forward to 2021, a lot of those stats still haven't really changed. And so I do think that our mission is still just as relevant as ever, even as we're starting to see things change a little bit, post George Floyd. There's still a really massive lack of capital going to women and underrepresented founders. And so for us, that's really the big problem. We saw that no one was really tracking that data. There were really few, a few number of Black and women investors. And so our team really wanted to go in and change the face of entrepreneurship by investing in some of these remarkable companies and founders who are changing the world. We see this as an opportunity for impact, but also a really big opportunity for investment returns. Because of this market inefficiency, we really believe that if you're investing in diverse founders who are solving the problems of the future, there's a really big opportunity for returns for investors. So we really see our mission as two-pronged, where we can do well by doing good at the same time.
And Gabby, why do you think there had been this problem? 3% funding, venture funding going to women and people of color. It just seems astounding to me that just that low percentage of funding is it because of the funding source, or is it because you haven't, or the communities that you're trying to support just haven't been encouraged to be more entrepreneurial? Is it a supply problem or a demand problem?
It's a good question. I think there's a lot of different parts of the problem. I think the biggest one that we see is if you look at who historically has had capital to invest in risky ventures, which all early stage companies really are, it's been people who've had generational wealth. It's mostly gone to, say, white male founders. And if you think about the venture capital landscape, often people are sourcing new companies or finding new founders through their existing network. And so it really starts to become a cascading problem where when the folks who have capital are investing in people who then look like them, went to the same schools as them, or have the same sort of background and community, that literally leaves out a whole swath of people who might not have access to those same networks. I think we see in a lot of data today that women and minorities are actually even more entrepreneurial on average than the rest of the US population. And so I don't think it's that people haven't been starting companies and aren't entrepreneurial themselves. I think there really just haven't been a lot of opportunities for them to get access to those networks, really understand the business of venture capital and what it means to be a venture-backed company. And so I think there's that network access and information gap as well that's really contributed to that huge gap. There's also, I think, a layer of bias, whether intentional or unintentional. I think that's something important that everyone should be really aware of too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just, you describe how people who fund others that kind of look like them, and that's kind of the issue here. And how is Harlem Capital set up differently from, let's say, the traditional venture investor in Silicon Valley?
Definitely. So I think at Harlem Capital, we really see ourselves as a community fund where we understand that if we're investing in diverse founders, it can't just be us investing in those founders. That's not really going to change the entire ecosystem. What it really takes is us galvanizing every stakeholder in the ecosystem to really make that difference. And so we think about it as how can we help to diversify all of the different pipelines and players who have a really big role in supporting or investing in early stage companies. So one of the things that we've done structurally is that we've launched an intern program where we've helped 70 different folks from MBA students to undergrads and professionals learn what it means to be an early stage investor, and then help funnel them into roles in venture capital or private equity. And so of the 70 interns we've had over the last, let's say 3.5 years, 17 of them have gone on to VC or private equity roles. I think, other things that we're doing in that same sort of area are around how do we cultivate a network of diverse operators? So people who have founded companies, who are working in tech, that want to support diverse founders as well through mentorship or helping them with customer introductions, or even just giving them advice tactically about how to run their business. How can we help to forge and build those connections as well? I think the other piece that's really important outside of that is that our whole focus is investing in women and underrepresented founders. So we're actively seeking those folks out through our own networks, which are diverse by nature given who we are as well, but also really trying to extend that. So to that point about the information gap, we really share a lot of content and information and education about venture capital, about what it looks like to raise, about how to be successful in fundraising. We really focus on being a thought leader in that way and being the folks that founders will refer other founders to and be the first one that they think of when they're looking to raise capital. So I think there's a great degree of intentionality in how we source and how we use our network, but also really focused on building within the entire tech ecosystem as well.
That's great. I love the idea of building that ecosystem. And do you put an annual conference together among your founders and put them together in the same room, or how do you actually connect them? What are the tools for connecting the founders and also linking them to the sources of capital?
Yeah, it's been great. I guess this year now that we're in this post-COVID era where we are able to add in some of those offline elements. So thinking about like online, where we've been for the last year, and the bulk of our fund, the first fund we invested through COVID. And so we hadn't met our founders in person and they hadn't met each other. And so what we did is we built a couple of things structurally in Slack where we connected all of our founders together in one platform so that they could really ask each other questions and build relationships that way. And that's been a really strong vehicle for them to get to know each other and build rapport. We also host webinars where we share really interesting and tactical information about how to hire talent and how to think about marketing and all of those different things that they're looking for, so that they can learn from industry experts, build connections themselves and also from each other. And then I think in the offline world, we actually did just host our first founder summit, something we're super excited to continue going forward. So we hosted it in partnership with Deloitte at Deloitte University and brought together 30 of our founders and our whole team and the team from Deloitte just for some, few days of fellowship and workshops and bonding. And that was a really remarkable experience. And so we're excited about that again. But I think for us, we'll always do a mix of online and offline. And as we're a distributed team, we're focused on doing events in different cities where our founders are, where the rest of our network is as well, to continue building those bridges.
That's great. Now, pivoting it a little bit, talk about yourself. I think it's fascinating. You're a chemical engineer. You've had very diverse experience working in product innovation at General Mills, a consumer products company. You were once on the project team for the Microsoft HoloLens, which is a mixed reality device I happen to know a little bit about because I have an investment in a competing company called Magic Leap. And then you came to Yale, the business school. You were also an innovation advisor at SciCity. So having taken on all these roles, these diverse set of experiences, can you talk us through that and what you've learned from each sort of node in that path?
Definitely. And you make the journey sound so concise that way, which I love. But it really was a journey. And I think a great mentor of mine really taught me for my career path at that stage to really treat every opportunity as a series of experiments, to see and understand and learn what you like, and more importantly, I think what you don't. And so, my work at General Mills, I think that was where the love of innovation and entrepreneurship and startup thinking really came from, because I was always working on early product innovation teams where we were operating as a startup within a large company, and always trying to figure out what's the new product we can build and what are the problems we can go solve and how do we find who those great customers and opportunities might be. And so that's where I really learned and fell in love with that early sort of 0 to 1 phase of building and creating. And so I always knew as I was going to Yale that I wanted to stay close to that, but I wasn't quite sure the form that it would take. And so then that's when I started, trying a lot of different things. I loved the time at SciCity where I was the innovation advisor, because that gave me an opportunity to test and learn if I liked working with an early founder. And I found out I did really love that. I actually worked tried to launch a startup magazine chapter at Yale. And that didn't go very well. It actually failed. And so with that, I learned I like working on a team, but also like, the work of investing, not necessarily, just plain journalism and working with founders from that lens. The Microsoft experience on HoloLens was great, incredible product and innovative product at a large company, but I still missed the dynamism of a smaller team. And so through that time period, I was still working in Harlem Capital. And with that, I think I found I really loved venture. I really loved investing. But more importantly, I think working towards this mission and with a team that was one of the most inspiring groups of people I've ever been around.
What is it about entrepreneurship and working with founder that's appealing to you?
There's a lot. I guess the core would be that they're seeing the future and trying to chart a path that people say is impossible, that it won't work. There's all of these reasons for why something will fail. And they still have this relentless optimism and courage to go and do and build the thing that, people say can't, shouldn't, or won't exist. And so I think it's, being able to support their vision for the future, being able to help guide them through different minefields, as we've seen, as we've invested in other, companies at a similar stage, and help, be part of their journey towards building the future that they're excited about. I also think there's as an engineer, I always love solving problems, and to me, really love diving into the different problems that our companies are solving. As a generalist fund, we have companies in the fintech space, in the software space, and a number of others. And so constantly getting to learn about different problems and how to solve them and work with our founders as they go about solving that, I think has been really exciting as well.
Mm. And you were an innovation advisor when you were at Yale, working with students, kind of student entrepreneurs. And now you're working with founders that obviously are doing this full time. And Do you see a difference between students that are trying to do something entrepreneurial within an academic environment, and what are the constraints and issues? I'm sure there are quite a few Yale students listening in online right now. What kind of advice do you have for them in terms of the balance between academics and doing something that's out of the box, being an entrepreneur?
For sure. Yeah, I think that double duty gets really hard. And having done that as a student, definitely empathize with other student entrepreneurs. I think the biggest difference is that at an organization like SciCity or any other on-campus innovation hub, there are just so many resources that I think student founders have an opportunity to tap into, whether it's at the centers themselves, with the experts that they bring in, the network of the alumni of the institution. I think that's probably the biggest difference. Once someone leaves school or is starting something having not gone to school, that network gap, that learning gap, there's a lot of different challenges that come to play. And so I think student founders have a really great opportunity to learn in that sort of safe space. But also if they're building something that's tailored to, Gen Z or other students, you've got like a captive customer base and opportunities to learn from your peers about what they like and what they don't. And so I think there's a really cool opportunity for consumer research and figuring out where you might want to go or build within the confines of the school. So I'd encourage students to really take advantage of all of those resources. I think the toughest thing is honestly learning how to balance time. And the best advice I can say is once you've figured out the thing that you're most excited about working on, say no to everything else that doesn't align with that. It's important, I think, to always stay open and to change or to new ideas. But if you're really passionate about something, you'd have to make some of those trade-offs for your time.
So now let's talk about you being an investor, identifying companies, and I first want to cover sort of some of the types of companies that you invest in, and then we could talk about how you discover the founders and maybe coach them and all that. So it seems to me, I did a little bit of homework and looked up your portfolio. Harlem Capital, as at least your website says, you have 36 portfolio companies. And I would say that some of the themes that emerge are you have companies that deal with certain affinity groups. You have companies that want to target expectant mothers, Black millennials, people looking for emotional support, couples looking for improving their relationships. Some of these companies that kind of target certain groups of users. And then you have other companies that try to focus on efficiency, whether it's CRM or direct-to-consumer analytics, or I think there is a company that recycles rejected borrowers for lenders to reconsider them. All these efficiency tools, most of them provided on a SaaS basis, software basis. Am I getting the theme right, or do you have kind of a 30,000-foot overall view of what are the key themes that Harlem Capital is trying to go after?
Yeah, that's a great overview. I love that. And I think because of our focus on diverse founders, I think that tends to be the first filter through which we look at and evaluate companies. I'd say within that, I think the way you explain it is a really great way of understanding the portfolio. I think another way is that we try to look thematically in broader categories. So software and productivity, I think, falls really well within that. We think a lot about like the future of finance. And so a lot of the fintech companies we've invested in and opportunities will fall from that lens. I think thematically, we're also really excited about Web3 and blockchain and the crypto space and how there's just so much opportunity to change, and touch everything from software, from fintech to anything else. We also have looked at companies in the health and wellness space, and that's been another focus, as well as HR tech, and have invested in a few companies there. So I'd say it's, I think we're a little bit more, we're thematic in terms of the founders, and then we've categories that we're pretty interested in. But beyond that, I think for us, we're really focused on who we're investing in. And so tend to really index on founders who can tell really good stories and sell really well and paint a really powerful vision about what they're building and why. founders who are really detail oriented and focused on the numbers and understand all of the little nuances that go into what makes their consumer tick and why they're so excited about that product. And then personally, I also really love founders who deeply understand their customer and understand the customer even better than they know themselves. And I think those three things are kind of the elements we look at for founders. And then to your point and what I shared earlier, that's sort of how we would think about some of the broader categories we invest in.
So I want to ask you about how do you approach the task of discovering founders that are diverse and trying to lean the firm's resources toward them. And let's take one industry. You talk about the blockchain and crypto space. I happen to have met some of the crypto founders, and I went to a blockchain conference. Unfortunately, the people who go to those conferences, the founders, they don't look very different from the traditional founders that are backed by Silicon Valley companies. So let's just take blockchain as an example. How do you go out and find founders that are a little bit different, that are diverse, that women? How do you do that?
A great question, and it's something we're actively thinking about in particular for this category. I'd say we think about it two ways, or maybe three. I'd say the first way, so there's anything that we can do from an outbound perspective, right? To show founders that this is a category we're interested in, that we're interested in investing and backing you, and showing what we've learned and the resources that we can offer to companies that are in this category. And so one of the partners on our team has done a really great job of really showcasing and building a really strong network to support founders that we invest in crypto, Web3, and blockchain. From an outbound perspective, another thing we really think about is media and content. And so right now we're in the works of thinking about how can we showcase who those diverse founders are in the category, just so that, to your point, like, people know who they are and where they are and what they're building. Because I really think it's hard to see and understand that the category and people exist if you don't know who they are. And so that visibility is really important. And I think there's also just quite a bit of legwork of going out into the community and being part of different unique networks and finding who those founders are. Tend to find that, like, a lot of diverse people will, join together in different Discord groups or other things, and that tends to be another really strong way. So I think, the industry as a whole is sort of where software and the broader venture capital space was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. But we do see a lot of diverse founders in the category, have invested in a couple, are excited about investing in more. And so it's not that they aren't there. It's just we have to be more intentional about finding them and making sure they know who we are too.
Yeah. Well, I think you let out a secret. It's all these groups on Discord.
There you go. I know there's so many at some point, but yeah, I think it's exciting. And it's Art Basel's also this weekend, and our team is doing a couple of different events in conjunction with other diverse-led firms. So it's been pretty exciting to see that so far grow.
Yeah. And what are you looking for in founders? What are the characteristics and traits that would be appealing to you as you commit funds to their startups?
Yeah. Let's see. I would say some of what I mentioned a little bit earlier as well. I think we look for founders who I think have a really clear point of view on the problem they're solving, and it's very crisp as to why it's this problem and why they're the right fit for that particular problem or market. And so founder market fit is something we think about quite a bit. I think we also look for how they bring people together. Have they been able to hire a team or bring on a co-founder? Do they have a strong network to bring in new people to the opportunity? And can they tell a really good story, not only to us, but to potential hires? And what does that mean for how they're able to pitch themselves and the company to downstream investors? I think we also think about, the scale of the opportunity and how big are they dreaming, and is it a true venture backable opportunity? So I think all of that in terms of who the founder is from that side. I think also I also love founders who know their customer and have done a lot of research and do a lot of iterative testing and experimentation to figure out the right way to go. So I think we look for grit, focus, determination, but also founders who are excited about building for the long haul and building something really big for the market.
Yeah. I mean, you spend all of your time evaluating founders, but also do you get something back in return? What have you learned from, all the founders that you've met? What's been kind of some of the top lessons that you've taken away from them?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest lessons is that, and it's something that actually was a little surprising, was that the founder journey is really lonely. I think even if a founding team has a couple of other members, it's still really lonely because no one else is really experiencing or going through the same thing as you, and it can be hard to connect with other people and have them understand that journey. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we really try to bring our founders together, because as investors, we can only help so much and with certain things. But it's really the relationships that they have with other founders that help take it to the next level, but also give them an opportunity, to really dive deeper on some of the things that are really challenging that an investor might not be able to help with or even understand unless they've been a founder themselves. So I think I think that's been something that's been really remarkable. I think the other is sort of just like the relentless optimism. I think, as investors, we have ups and downs. And for founders, they experience it, 10 times more than we do. But even through the highs and the lows, they're still incredibly optimistic about where they're going and what they're building. And I think that's a core trait that I think a lot of great founders have to have.
So Harlem Capital's mission is quite different from the traditional VCs because you're trying to channel the resources into founders that are diverse, people of color, women. What's your advice to the founders, to your diverse founder community, if they want to tap into the mainstream venture community? Because there's just so much resources there. I think the whole VC industry is about $80 billion of capital. So how do you? What's your advice to them?
Yeah. And I want to make sure I'm clear. Are you asking around sort of like reaching and raising capital from, say, larger mega funds and other firms? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say it's pretty interesting. I think, in the last year, there's been just an incredible amount of capital that's come into the market at the late stage, middle stage, and early stage where we invest. And so in some ways, we've seen founders dependent primarily by their market, been able to raise a lot of capital very quickly from some of these larger, say, mega funds or just bigger firms in sort of the broader Silicon Valley ecosystem. But I do think there's a pretty big barbell. I think on one hand, you will have founders who raise quickly and raise a lot of money, but I'd say the bulk of founders still have a lot of challenges if they're not in a category that investors are really excited about or pouring a lot of money into. And so I'd say with that, some of the recommendations I share are that, founders really just need to be cognizant of that what's in the press isn't necessarily going to be the reality. And you have to be really thoughtful and strategic about how you go about a fundraise. So make sure that as you find investors, make sure that you get those details up front about how much they invest and will they invest in your category, and understand right away if it may or may not be a fit, for you to raise capital from them. Also think about, timing. It's really hard for founders to raise in November and December, and it can be a challenge because investors have already deployed funds. Everyone wants to go on the holidays, and so things really kick off in the new year. And so I always encourage founders to be cognizant of that timing at the end of the year, but even at the end of July and August, when a lot of investing firms slow down as well. I think another thing to consider is you may have your list of funds that you're excited about, but look at where they are in their fund life cycle. Because if they're at the end of their fund or raising their next, they might not be ready to invest, even if it's something that your company is something they might be really excited about. So I think there's a lot of strategy around fundraising, but overall, I think it is still really hard, and the more you can sort of plan ahead and build that network, it makes it a lot easier.
One thing I've learned about fundraising is, as a company, as a startup, is you always raise money when you don't need it.
Exactly. Yeah, when everyone says they're not fundraising, that's when everyone wants to give you money at the same time.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about specific companies, some of the companies that you've worked on personally. Of the portfolio of 36 companies, what's your favorite, and which companies have you worked on? Do you want to talk about one or two of them?
Yeah, and it is so hard to pick favorites. So I'll lean to the ones I've worked on and maybe, a little thematic within a category. But I think one of the things I think a lot about is e-commerce and e-commerce enablement and how everything has changed and that merchants still need a lot of tools to keep up, but also to make sure that they're making the most of, the opportunity for their company. And so we've invested in a few companies in e-commerce, namely CashDrop and Singuli, which I'll mention now. So CashDrop is a company we invested in first in their seed round in 2020. And the founder is Ruben Flores Martinez out of Chicago, and just an incredible, personal story and dynamic founder. He came to the US as an immigrant, was formerly undocumented, taught himself to code, initially launched one company and then decided to launch CashDrop, which is a mobile e-commerce platform that lets any entrepreneur get up and running with their business in under 15 minutes. And so when we think about the growth of e-commerce and helping people transact and engage online, we're always looking and thinking about tools that make that process even more easier and more seamless. I think, as the pandemic continued to, unfold, one of the things we started thinking a lot about was not just e-commerce from like an engagement level with consumers, but sort of on an enablement scale. And what does it look like deeper into the tech stack for a merchant to understand how they're ordering and, their supply chain and what does that look like? Because it has a lot of really, massive business implications. And so one of the companies we invested in is called Singuli, and they are an inventory management platform for brands in the apparel space and in a couple other categories that helps brands really think about and figure out and predict how to order and what to order and to monitor their supply chain at a different level. And so I think we're really excited about opportunities deeper into that stack and thinking about logistics and embedded finance within, the entire e-commerce space. So, both of those companies, I think, were in great categories, had really remarkable founders. And I think right away, we just saw the need and we're excited to partner with them.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to try to, now we have members of the audience who have put in some questions, and I'm going to try to cover some of them. We have a question here. How would you recommend college entrepreneurship ecosystems to support similar principles of equity and diversity in their own initiatives? So we're talking about the ecosystem in the college environment. How do you structure those elements into their programs?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think in terms of like when those programs are starting. So let's say, SciCity is launching a new accelerator program and bringing in new companies and students. Looking at the data and making sure that as you look at the entire student population, that you're pulling and getting in folks that are representative of that entire population. And so I think for us, one thing we think about when sourcing is tracking that data and making sure that when there's no bias in our own data and reporting, but that we're seeing a large and representative swath of the founders that are in our pipeline. I think another thing is really sort of like, what does the experience look like when students are in those programs, building companies and engaging with experts? Is the expert network reflective of the students themselves? It's great to get advice from someone who understands the market and understands what you're building, but something deeper to work with an expert who I think understands a little bit more about your lived experience. And I think that can be another way innovation centers at universities can really think about that. Also think about that in terms of who you're hiring and bringing on to support these early founders and making sure that you're building an environment that's inclusive and representative of everyone. And so I don't think there's like one right answer or one solution. I think it takes a holistic approach, but also a deep commitment to wanting to make that environment inclusive and accessible to everybody.
Yeah, definitely something we can think about in SciCity in terms of how we provide more support for our student entrepreneurs. You talk about data and tracking the data. Can you speak a little bit about what Harlem Capital is doing in terms of tracking founder data, especially in the communities that you try to support?
Totally. It's something we really love. We've got a saying internally that data drives decisions. And so we're constantly thinking about and figuring out how to analyze data in everything we do. So if we look at the investment side of things, we have a tracker where we input all of the different companies that we've seen in a given year. And so this year, we've seen over 3,000 companies, more than double what we saw last year and double the year before. And in that, we are collecting data on where founders are coming from. So what state or country, their background, their identity, the industries that they're in, and all sorts of things. We do that for companies on, that apply to our website, that we meet in person, doesn't matter. But we take all of that information and aggregate it and analyze on a quarterly basis what our pipeline looks like and how many diverse founders we've seen. I think in, let's say in the third quarter, for instance, we saw like 55% of our portfolio or our pipeline was Black founders, 40% was women. And so we're constantly looking at that to understand if there's any bias in our process, to make sure that we're expanding the types of founders that we're seeing and making sure that we're constantly seeing the best diverse founders across the industry. Another thing we like to do in terms of data is showcase that data to the rest of the venture community. I think one of the challenges we saw early on when starting Harlem Capital was that there wasn't data on who the women founders were and who the diverse founders were, less data even on who the diverse investors were. And that's something that we've continued to put out and something that we're building. And as we go forward in the fund, we're thinking about, as we're expanding geographies, as we're expanding industries, how can we continue to find and unearth that data in a way that's actionable for us and informative for the rest of the industry? So it's something we're really passionate about, excited about, and the whole team kind of works on together.
That sounds great. Is there a place that we can go to see that data? Does Harlem Capital put out the data on your website, or maybe you can think about periodically, doing a report, every 6 months or whatever it is? How do you think about that?
Yeah, all of our reports are on our website at harlem.capital/blog. So we'll have our, Power 300 or Power 250, which shows all of the diverse venture capitalists. We had a 300 top list of women founders who raised, and that's where we'll periodically publish all of the different reports. So I know we just had one published on the, diverse fundraisers of the third quarter, or the first half of this year. But we're always publishing. And so the best places for people to keep up with us are on our social media channels. So at Harlem Capital on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, and that's where we share more information too.
Yeah, that's great marketing. Do you see other similarly minded funds being raised to focus on underrepresented communities, or run by GPs that are from underrepresented communities? Do you see more peers coming into the space now?
Definitely. In fact, we did a report on that, and I think we published it earlier this year. But I think in the post George Floyd period, we did see a number of funds pop up that were focused on diverse founders or run by diverse managers. And I think that's been really exciting. We don't ever think about the industry or market with a scarcity mindset. We really believe that the more diverse investors there are, the more opportunities there are for founders, and that just makes it a better ecosystem for everyone. And so we're always celebrating and highlighting all of the other managers who are coming to the market, because it means that capital is flowing to diverse managers, and that then flows to diverse founders in a more meaningful way. And so I forget the exact stats, but there is a report on our blog that folks can check out that showcases all of the different diverse funds, whether diverse-led or diverse-focused.
Great. You talked about this internship program. I think you mentioned something like 70 interns that you try to place with the various funds. Is that right?
Yeah. So we launched the intern program in 2018, and every quarter we take 6 interns who work with us really intimately in the deal diligence process. So everything from sourcing to meeting with founders to diligence and then investment committee work. And so really try to give them a full experience and look at what it looks like to work in venture capital. And then with those interns, we've always tried to help them get roles in the VC industry as well. Because again, if there's more diverse investors, there's more diverse founders who are raising capital. And so we've had 70 interns. We just wrapped up our 12th class, and the 13th starts in January, which is really exciting. And so we've had 70 so far, and 17 of them have gone on to roles at other VC firms or private equity firms. I think some of the really exciting wins that have come from that is that, one of our former interns was looking at one of our portfolio companies because they're at a later stage fund. Or sometimes we're, able to co-invest with some of former interns. So it's been really cool to see the community really grow. But we're always really focused on how do we help diversify the investor seed at venture capital.
And can you talk a little bit about the background of these interns? At what stage of their academic or professional life are they in? And I mean, for those that are listening in, if they want to apply to become an intern, what do they need to do?
Please apply. We make our process super easy. It's just a resume drop and a few questions on our website. So no essays or anything like that. It is really competitive. So we had, I think, over 800 applications this last cycle. And, we always see repeat interns apply. And so if it's not the first time, we always encourage folks to reapply. But what is really cool is we try to build a really diverse class. And so our interns have come from undergrad, whether juniors or seniors, MBA students at various programs, and professionals. So we've had consultants and bankers and folks in tech. We had a lawyer, in one class. And so it's pretty varied. I think the core things we're really thinking about and looking for are people really excited about the work at Harlem Capital? Are they really committed to investing in diverse founders and diversity broadly? And are they excited to learn and grow? And it's a ton of fun, a lot of work, but I think a really cool opportunity to really see the inside of a fund.
We have a question about the stage of the company that Harlem Capital will invest in. Is it early? How early do you get? If I just have a business plan, but I don't even have a product, can I get funding from Harlem Capital, or do I need to have developed something of a product, or do I need to be revenue generating? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and it's definitely your range. We've invested in companies where it really is just the idea and a pitch deck, and companies where they've had 100K plus in revenue. So it's pretty broad. But I'd say that we today invest at what we call early seed. So that would be companies raising at the pre-seed or seed level, where they're before product market fit. And so the ideal company, has a working product or a demo, has at least engaged with customers or done surveys and even has customers, which would be great. But really for us, it's like, where are they in their journey? And we try to right size our approach for that. So I'd say anywhere from the idea stage to working prototype to having customers or revenue. But for us, it's, we're just excited to work with great founders and can be flexible sort of within that.
If I'm a founder, I want to approach Harlem Capital to get some funding. You mentioned that you're looking for founders that are good at selling, right? Selling an idea, selling themselves, selling the product. What if I'm kind of introverted? I'm not as articulate as I should be, but I have a great idea. How do you coach me through that?
That's a great question. I would say it says still bring your full self. I think there's a number of different ways to sell and tell stories. And sometimes it's with data. Sometimes it's just showing your passion for what you're building and why, showing the depth of understanding that you have for the problem. And so I don't think it's necessarily, all of the outward ways of talking about how people sell and telling stories. I think there's a lot of different ways. And I think great founders come from anywhere, all walks of life, all personalities. It's more about how can you share what you're building with the world and how well you can explain that to people who might not be as familiar with your industry or category.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, Gabby, you've spent time at Yale and you've worked with Yale students. What do you think Yale as an institution, whether it's Tri-City or Yale as a whole, what do you think Yale can do more to encourage people to think innovatively and also to encourage people to become more entrepreneurial?
I think perhaps one tactical thing would be, I think, showing the stories of Yale alumni and Yale students who are doing that work, who have done it before and or have been successful. I think one of the challenges when I was a student was not necessarily knowing who the founders were, whether current students or alumni. And so I think that, the university could do a better job of sharing a little bit more of that narrative and showing the path that these people took. I think one of the great advantages and one of the things I really loved about Yale was that there's so much interdisciplinary thought and engagement in the way that, the school has done sort of like the academic part of programming. And I think another thing that could do a little bit more of is really galvanize that energy and bring people from the business school and the law school and the college and all of those different pieces together to solve, and think about how to solve different problems. And I think SciCity is a really awesome hub and incubator for that. But yeah, I think, sort of in that short term, really showing those stories and highlighting what people have done, where they've gone and how they've done it so that that path is a little bit more clear.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned putting every one of your entrepreneurs on a Slack group and they could connect with each other. Maybe that's one of the ideas that Yale could do.
That's true. Yeah, a very active Discord or Slack. That would be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah. And Claire, how are we doing on time?
Hi, Joe. I think we could take one more question and then we'll wrap at about 12:50.
Okay. So I'll ask the last question. We're talking about innovation and coming up with innovative ideas and out-of-the-box thinking. And Harlem Capital is an example of being out of the box with the mission that you have. But Gabby, can you tell us a little bit of, do you think that within Harlem Capital, is there more room for innovation? I mean, you have, the firm has developed established ways of doing things. You have a very systematic way of evaluating entrepreneurs and ideas. Seems like you have a great pipeline of deals. But is there more room for innovation within Harlem Capital that you can think of?
I think there's always room. And it's something, every quarter, every month even, we're always talking about what we can do better, what we can do differently, what we can try. I think, I shared a lot today about the things we're doing and what we've done, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of things that we've tried that we've stopped doing or have changed or modified because it wasn't working or we wanted to do it better or differently. And so I think, as we think about expanding our network of operators in our community, we're really thinking deeply about what we can do differently from other funds, but even from what we've done before, so that we can make that a really rich and engaging experience for everyone. As we think about our intern program, one of the things we're in the future would be excited about is how we can expand that to not just, investment roles, but roles at different startups or, the companies we've invested in. And as we go global, as we've, just made our first investment in Kenya, our first investment in Peru, we're thinking a lot about what does it look like for Harlem Capital to have that global footprint. I mean, in the long term, we want to be, investing in every asset class and in every geography. And so it takes a lot of small steps, but I think a lot of creative thought and iteration to do that really well at scale over time. So something we're always thinking a lot about, and we'll have some exciting things in the works, I think, in the next year.
Well, I'm sure if you start an internship program that will place students into your portfolio companies, that'll be a very popular program. So, if you plan on doing that, please broadcast to the Yale community, and I'm sure you'll get tons of signups.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're super excited about that one day in the future, but it's in sights at some point.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Gabby. I'm, so thrilled to be able to do this, and thank you so much. You share so many insightful stories and ideas that, I think that we're all very grateful for your time and insights. Thank you.
Definitely. Thanks for having me. This was such a pleasure, and we'd love to do it again sometime.
Great.
Thank you so much, Joe and Gabby. This was terrific. For those in the audience who might be curious about the recording, we'll make it available in about a week. And it's been a pleasure listening to the conversation. Thank you both.
Thanks. Have a
Thank
great day.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.